We have a huge KB reveal. I think Jude Law shines, and so much more to talk about in the most recent episode of Skeleton Crew. Guys, buckle up. Let's hop right into it. Episode 6 opens with the kids falling onto the snow. KB needs her orbital link put back in, which is again another hint that something more is going on here, and we finally get some more information about her this episode. Jude is then captured by the pirates, who didn't actually die in the acid, and as he's taken away, the Republic X-Wings show up, probably because the people at the resort had called the cops on these pirates, and now the help has arrived. So they rush onto the ship and they fly off, leaving the kids jumping up and down trying to get the attention of the X-Wings, but yet they just fly away. Because clearly they're not there to save the kids. There's been no communication to anyone from AT-AT and outward. This is just simply the Republic showing up to get rid of piracy. Now, I am going to say that most of this episode is not really moving the plot along very far, meaning we're going to start in one place and barely get to another place by the time the episode is done, but instead this episode really developed some of the characters. However, I think there's a problem with the way that they went about it, and we'll talk about that at the end. KB and Fern have a fight because mainly KB feels like she's going to lose her friend if she's honest, that she can't keep up and do all the things that Fern does. And Fern has this idea to climb all the way up the mountain to get to the ship. And honestly, KB realizes she can't do that right now, but can't vocalize that to her friend because her friend is like a bulldozer.
So you just assume there aren't any? Hey, KB, why are you... Because if you were actually interested, you'd actually be listening for once. And maybe we'd actually talk about something.
She just moves past everyone with her strong opinions and her very hard exterior, all just to get her way. This is kind of how she's learned to operate and why she's taking control as the captain and many of the other things, because it's just her personality. I think this is a really interesting and in-depth way to show the difference in personalities and relationships. And there's going to be a big growth point for Fern in this episode also. The crew splits up. Whim and KB go one direction, Fern and Neil go the other, as it's revealed that KB still has the coordinates, so they just have to get back to the ship. Then we catch back up with Jude, who has been arrested by the pirates who didn't die in that acid, and he's taken to Brutus, and he's basically sentenced to death by airlock, which is kind of a callback to what he said at the very beginning. Captain Silvo said about the guy who wouldn't let them in the vault. He said, put him in the airlock, which basically is kind of like walking the plank, but in outer space.
Wait! What of equal time? Right of last appeal. So says the Pirates' Code.
However, we see again that the idea of this Pirates' Code, this honor among thieves, comes to play as Jude is given his last and final right to his time to state his case. And it's in this moment, in these like 4 minutes, that Jude Law absolutely shines. I'm going to do a deeper dive video into just this section. So if you want to see more about that, make sure you subscribe down below. But the one point I'm going to make is the way that they did the kind of song to wrap it all up. And this idea of the legend of Tac Renaud is the thing that he uses to sell on the idea that, hey, there's this eternal treasure. And in fact, I know what this eternal treasure is. So make sure you follow me. It buys him some time, but I think it was also done really well.
Tac Renaud soared away aboard the Onyx Cinder, and never was he seen again, for at Atten he did plunder.
Unlike other Star Wars shows who tried to include music, and it just didn't work. So as KB and Whim follow these trash crabs, we start to finally get more about who KB is, about how there was this accident that had happened to her, and now as a result of that accident, she has all these cybernetics, which is the reason for the headgear and seemingly more all throughout her body that is starting to shut down because of lack of maintenance, for corrosion, and all these other things. And all of a sudden, Whim has to scramble into survival and savior mode almost to help KB and to save her life. Whim has to melt down the wires to make a new microfuse to put in the back of KB's head. This was a little bit jarring. I wasn't ready for this. And there were a few moments that I genuinely thought, were they actually going to do it? Were they going to allow one of these characters to die? And I think that it was set up and filmed and directed really well. I think the kid acting in this moment really was solid and good. I didn't sit there and think, oh man, that's cringe. Instead, it worked really well. And in the midst of all this, KB shares her deepest, darkest fear. And I think it's the fear that most kids have at the end of the day, that they're worried and concerned that they're going to have zero friends, that the friendship that's falling apart right now is going to mean there's no more people who can be friends with them. And Whim just casually is like,
Anyway, you could just be friends with me and Neil.
completely displays so accurately the difference between boys and girls in a lot of ways, in this kind of over-analyzing, fear-based, anxiety-inducing perspective that KB has, versus this like, hey, it's all going to be fine. There's no worries at all. Why are you worried about anything? Life is great kind of attitude of Whim. And then Whim does finally save KB from a total system shutdown, and we get one of the best scenes we've seen thus far, in my opinion, in Skeleton Crew.
That was close. To what? Total system shutdown. What? Probably thought it would be more exciting to save someone's life. Anyway, thanks, Jedi.
But this isn't just about KB and Whim, this is also about Fern and Neil, and showing how Fern is growing in her understanding. And Neil says the thing that KB can't, that you're going to leave me behind. I can't do what you do, Fern. And it gets Fern to react in a very interesting way, not in the way that KB probably thought she would, but it's showing growth for this character, that she's willing to think outside the box and how to care for someone instead of just kind of, hey, no, pick up the pace, let's go, climb faster. She instead ties a rope around her waist, ties a rope around Neil's waist to help him climb. I'm not saying it actually works, but the idea of it, the thought of it, shows the growth of this character, and I think is a really important thing, especially when we get to the very end of the episode that reveals even more. But as they're climbing, their ship is being taken away by these trash droid drone things that they then have to jump on the back of to try and get to their ship before it's thrown into the compactor. But while that's all happening, KB and Whim find out that these trash crabs are far more nefarious. I kind of felt all along that there was something off about these things. They kind of felt like the toys in Sid's room when you first meet them. It feels really dark and mysterious. But in that, obviously, they're just misunderstood. But these little trash crabs are trying to bring food to the mother crab, and it finds KB and Whim in a bad spot as Neil and Fern have to swoop in to save the day, and all of it comes to a literal crashing halt when the crab chucks a rock at one of the drones, knocking them out of the air, putting them all off onto the ground. Miraculously, no broken bones, and Fern is feeling the guilt and the weight of everything, feeling like the failure, and of course Whim comes to the rescue.
Never should have left you guys. I'm sorry I was being so... you were amazing! And you even got the ship and everything?
And clearly all of this separation and challenge kind of helped her realize how much she cared about KB. She thought she was going to lose her friend, and it meant that now she was going to come back and apologize. She's realizing that she was in the wrong. She was pushing too hard. She wasn't listening to her friend, and instead she apologizes, and you get this just really beautiful moment.
I was afraid to tell you when there's things I can't do. It's okay. You're my best friend. My best friend.
Do you guys hear that?
But it's quickly interrupted as they find out that their ship, the Onyx Cinder, the only way they know off this planet and back home, is about to be destroyed in a robotic trash compactor that melts down all this metal and spits it out the other. And so they have to rush into action. KB has to hit the engine again, kind of like Han Solo, and a callback to the early episodes, how they even got the ship going in the first place. Fern makes the hard and risky choice to say the only option left is to hit the hull destruct button, the button that SM-33 said to never hit, that we were pretty sure it was going to be Whim was the one that just itching to press a button was going to, but instead Fern does it, and the ship sheds its skin like a snake as it pulls off. The armor is taken in by the destructive trash compactor, and they're able to fly off. As this happens, a cleaner, sleeker, as Whim says, new ship kind of emerges out of the old, dusty, ratted covering that the armor of the Onyx Cinder was. I think this is an amazing metaphor for the movement and the change and the character development that we've seen in Fern this episode, and really all the way up in the show to this point. When we first meet Fern, she's this hardened, kind of sarcastic, almost just in-your-face control type A personality who's too cool to be bothered outside detention, who's going to just kind of laugh in the face of these bullies who want to race them, and everything that Fern does, even in her interactions with SM-33 and others throughout the entire show, has been this bravado, this kind of hard exterior shell that is just protecting in a defense mechanism from the real person lying beneath. And in this episode particularly, she's shed that hard outer shell to show that she really does care and love her friends, that beneath all of that armor is one who is actually kind and generous and willing to listen. But it took her learning all of that on this journey, this self-discovery, and it really honestly took Neil being honest and open with her for her to recognize it, and KB almost being lost and, in her mind, almost losing her friend forever is what woke her out and said, hey, I can trust you. I can let go of this exterior armor and I can be myself around you. I think it's a beautiful lesson to be learned. Now, I'm not saying that kids watching this are going to pull that out, but I think to see the character arc of Fern in that way really makes a lot of sense. She isn't just this Mary Sue girl boss who's going to do everything and be perfect at everything. There's actual real character development here from the beginning of the show until now. And that's really what I appreciated a lot about this episode, is that it gave us more of that development and a little bit really of all the characters. Well, maybe not Neil in this episode, but we've seen a lot of character development throughout the show where these kids have been growing and maturing and doing more things and learning more and reacting differently than they would have if this had happened earlier in the season. However, it's not either or. Like, we don't have to have character development or a strong plot movement. We don't have to have either or, but when you have a 25-minute runtime, it's really hard to do both. It's really hard to give time and space to these important scenes that build the emotion and build the connection with these characters while also accomplishing a lot in an episode. So that's why some will look at this and go, it's filler. Well, it kind of is from a general filler episode. The plot doesn't move very much. But honestly, the thing that bothers me the most about this show and about every single Star Wars Disney Plus show that has a runtime of 25 to 35 minutes is you feel like you always have to choose either or. Either we get some character development and monologue type stuff, or we get the plot moving pretty quickly. And I'm hoping that this is kind of more a result of falling back into how they were writing the show when this was written. This kind of feels like the episodic little snippets snippets, tidbits. You know what I'm trying to say, that we were getting with Mandalorian season 3, and that didn't really go over very well. And honestly, if this episode, you could have made this episode an hour. I think you could have easily had an hour worth of material here to be able to do more. You could have had a little bit more type of stuff going on where you're just not going from, okay, the slide to this, to that, and then, okay, now they're off the planet. Because every time they get in the ship, the episode ends. Literally every time they get in the ship, the episode ends. And I get the cliffhanger aspect of it, but I also think this is what separates okay and good shows from great, amazing shows, is they do more in the time that they've given. And maybe I'm asking too much, but that's just kind of my feeling and my frustration with the show. The other aspect that's slightly frustrating is we've got no new information about the planets, about the mystery, and that's the kind of thing. Like, I feel like this episode would have done well to see more on Atten of the parents and the struggle and what are they doing, what's happening, because now what it feels like is going to happen is you're just going to have a pirate ship show up on Atten, you're going to have the kids show up on Atten, everyone's just going to show up on Atten, and then they're going to have some kind of conclusion or challenge, and I'm guessing that Jude Law is going to choose the kids over the pirates. That's kind of my guess, is how this is all going to resolve, and I think it's all going to resolve to like a happily ever after type of scenario. But I think one of the best parts of the show is the mystery of these 9 jewels of the Old Republic, but I don't know that we're going to get more about it. Needless to say, I think Jude Law shines in this episode and is absolutely fantastic in the scenes that he has here, really invoking and bringing about an interesting level to his character. Again, this feels like a moment where if you were a Force user, there's definitely a time to use the Force to make everyone else around you realize, oh, you're special. You have more powers than we do. And like, he's about to be thrown out in an airlock and he doesn't do anything. Like, do they not think that he has any kind of power at all? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, if you want to check out more videos on my channel, you can do that. I am going to do a longer breakdown of that one scene of Jod on the ship giving his defense, because I think there's so much in there to talk about just from a directing standpoint and a monologue. I think it's fantastic. And if you want to see things like that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for being here. Remember, the Force will be with you always.